Well, church, it's great to have you here. If it is your first time, a very warm welcome to you again. I have the microphone working now, so I know you can all hear me. We preach in series in Freedom Church, and we are in a series called More Than Sundays. This is week 2. If you missed week 1, don't worry, week 2 is still going to make sense to you, but you can always go back and watch week 1, because as we teach and preach, we kind of do it in series, so it kind of flows through. But this week, I want to talk into the subject of serving, but wider than that is of how we give of ourselves for God. And that is really what I want to talk about today in many different ways. And I want to just throw out the question to you to start with is, what are you building your life upon? If you had to put down one thing or a one sentence, what would your answer be? Would it be, I'm building my life upon God and all of his plans for me? Would it be, I'm building it on my career? I'm building it on my savings, I'm building it on my family, all things that are not necessarily bad things, not necessarily evil things, but are we building our lives on the right thing? And that's what I want to talk to you about today. I think because sometimes we fall into routines and rhythms and ways of doing things, and what's been really interesting for us, even as we've come into a new venue and a new building, I said to our guys, it's like, forget how we did church before. This is a fresh start. Let's have fresh imagination. If we want to do it differently, we can do it differently. We're in a new space. But how often do we know that we kind of get stuck in the ways of doing things? You kind of do things the same way because you've always done them, or maybe you don't even quite know why you do them. I heard a story. I'm not sure if this is the true story, if this is one of those pastors' stories, but I'm going to tell it anyway. And it was a newly married couple. And one of the first weekends they were together, the wife was going to make this meal for the husband, and he walks in and she puts the meat in the tray and she cuts the end off the one piece of meat, the other end off the other piece of the meat, and then puts it in the oven. And he said to her, he said, why did you cut the ends off the meat? And she said, I don't know. My mum always cut the ends off the meat. I'll phone her and ask her. So she phones her mum and says, Mum, why did you cut the ends off the meat? And she said, I don't know. My mum always cut the ends off the meat. And so she calls her mum, the grandmother, and she said, why do you always cut the ends off the meat? And she said, what do you mean? She said, well, when you used to cook meals, you always used to cut the one end off and the other end off to put it in the oven. She said, that's because I had a small oven. And so I know it's a bit of a silly story, but as the third generation still doing the same thing, only because they'd seen someone else do it. There was no real reason for it. There was no benefit to it. She probably thought, I'm going to cook the most juicy meat. But actually, no, it was just because the oven was too small to fit the piece of meat in. And I say that because I think in our own lives, we kind of have those things that we just do. They just happen. Or maybe we saw our parents doing, so we kind of do it in the same way. And I want to just provoke you today. Have a little think about some of those things you do and the reasons behind why you do them. And this is quite a famous bit of scripture. We're going to read from Matthew 7 in a moment. And this is talking about how you build your life. And it's in Matthew 7, verses 24 to 27. And it says this, everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell and the floods came and the winds blew and beat on that house. But it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like the foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell and the floods came and the winds blew and beat against that house. And it fell, and great was the fall of it. And as I was preparing, now I went to church from ever. My parents were Christians and used to take me to church 3 times on a Sunday. And as I was preparing, suddenly something happened in my brain when I remembered a song from when I was a child. Now, if you've been in church for a long, long time, I've always wanted to be on the worship team. They won't allow me. They say you're not allowed. But if I sing a song during my preach, surely no one can stop me. Yes, Adam's cheering me on. And I don't know if I want to sing it now, actually. But he used to go, don't build your house on the sandy land. Does anyone else know this song, or is it just me? Just you. Just me? Oh, no. I was hoping at least someone will. It says, don't build it too near the shore. Well, it might be kind of nice, but you'll have to build it twice. You'll have to build your house once more. That's verse 1. You better build your house upon a rock. Make a good foundation on a solid spot. Oh, the storms may come and go, and the peace of God you will know. That's the end. Now you can applaud me. And that is why I'm not on the worship team. But it's true about what are you building your life upon? Are you building it on something solid that when the rains come, when the difficulties come, are you doing things for the right reasons? Are you doing it for God, or are you doing it for your own way and your own sake? Because actually when things go wrong and you're not building it on the right foundations, actually the house falls away. It's difficult. We spoke last week about how the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. That's what he wants to do. And if we're not building our lives on solid ground, that's what will happen. So I want to ask you that question. What are you building your life upon? What is it that you're building your life upon? As I say, we're talking about more than Sundays. And last week I talked about what it was to go from making a decision to say yes to Jesus to actually becoming a disciple of Jesus. And this today really flows on from that. And the title of today's message, if you like to have a title, is More Than a Task. More Than a Task. And as I was thinking about this, the word task means a piece of work to be done or undertaken. And I think sometimes we get into the thought pattern of God's asked me to do a task. He's asked me to do this thing and I've got to do it. And we get into this mentality that actually isn't how God wants us to do. He loves us and wants to bless us with the opportunity to be a part of things, but they're not tasks that we have to complete in that kind of way. Now my job, aside from being a pastor, is I'm a digital marketer. And one of the things that I use to be able to keep track of what I need to do is a program where when I've completed the task, I do a little tick box, and this little animal jumps across the screen in celebration. It's like, yes, you've completed the task. And whenever I complete a task, I'm happy. I'm like, yep, the little animal comes across the screen, and I can forget about that. Now, some tasks happen once, and I do them, and they're done. Other tasks I have to keep doing week upon week. And I don't know if you're like me, some things that we have to do in life, we don't always enjoy. Who likes, for example, who likes putting the bins out? Yeah, no hands. I didn't think there'd be any hands. There's some things, but if you don't put the bins out, what happens? The house really smells, doesn't it? It's got to be done. There's some things that we have to do. And there's some tasks that I have to do, and I tick them off on my thing, and I get the little animal. It's like, hooray, you've done it. And then immediately it pops up with next week's date saying, you need to do it again. And I'm like, oh. And I think for some of us, and this has happened to me, it's like, even with church, you come in, you think, I've got to do my task this week, or this is what I'm going to be doing, and it's like, oh, that's done for this week, I don't need to think about it until next week, or I've been to church now, that's done, I don't need to think about God until the next week. But actually it's so different to that. Our perspective, our mindset should be so different. How better is it to think, well, I'm going to come and do this task. It's not doing a task, but actually I'm doing it for somebody. You know, if you're thinking, oh, I'm going to just clean the toilets, for example, or I'm just going to put the cafe out. Rather than thinking in that way, thinking, I get to clean the toilets so that people come in, they get to have a pleasant time as they walk in through those doors. You know, when we first arrived here, there was cockroach poo everywhere. And one of our wonderful women cleaned it all up really nice so that it would be a nice place for you to go. Not thinking of it as a task, of thinking of like, how can I serve other people? And one of the words, I would like to ban a word in our church, if that's okay with everybody. It's a word which I don't really like, because I think in church, we should always do things intentionally. There should always be purpose behind it. So if you're all in agreement, I wonder if we can ban the word just. Is that okay? We're not just doing anything, okay? So if you're coming in and you're standing on the door, I don't want to hear anyone say, oh, I'm just standing on the door, or I'm just doing worship, or we're just going to pray. We never just do anything. We do it intentionally. We do it because God calls us to do it. And actually there's an intentionality behind everything that we do. Today I had the fortunate thing of arriving a little bit later than I normally would. And I arrived and all of our team were over here praying. They'd set everything up. Everything was ready to go. They came in early and gave of themselves so that as you came in today, if you weren't serving, you're able to come into a nice environment. You're able to have worship that sounded good because people have been practicing. There was words on the screen so you could see what was happening. If you've got kids, they're out the back. They're safe, don't worry. Anne and Eden and Matt have got them and they're looking after them. That's all because of the preparation. And they came in and thinking of it as more than just a task. It wasn't just a task to them today. It's like, I'm coming in, I'm giving of myself so that if you're a parent, you can enjoy the service today without your kids interrupting you. But there's a phrase, I don't know if it's as common here as in the UK, but I don't know if you've ever heard this phrase, we're human beings, not human doings. Has anyone heard that, yeah? And I think the essence behind it is like, it's okay just to be. We don't need to do anything. We just be. That's all we need to do. And I think that's quite a modern concept, isn't it? Like, more and more people are like, I'm just going to sit and be. But actually, yes, we are human beings, but actually we're called to do things as well. And I think when we say we're human beings, not human doings, we're basically saying this, that being is a good thing and doing is a bad thing. And doing isn't a bad thing. God called us to, Adam and Eve, right at the very beginning, to work the land. It's one of the first things that he asked us to do. It's not a bad thing to do things, but it's the mentality and the way that we do them. And I'd actually go to change it around and say being is fundamental. It talks in the Bible of be still and know that I am God. Just be in God's presence. He leads me beside still waters. There's this thing of just being in God's presence. That's so important, and I'm not negating that in any way. But actually doing is a key. It's a key to unlocking who we are and unlocking our potential and our purpose. I've seen people who've come into church and not really have been maybe a little bit directionless, but actually as they've found their purpose and found their calling in God, actually they've come alive again. It's a key to unlocking who they were all along. There's something about serving and giving and meeting that forms something in you, and it multiplies things outside of you. As you do it, it does do something in you. As you give of yourself, I know for the guys who were stood here this morning welcoming people as they arrived, there was something that was happening within them, but actually it multiplies out of them. How, if you've walked through the door for the first time and maybe you were a little bit nervous to come through the doors, and there's a friendly face that says, hey, it's great to see you today. How great is that as you walk through the door? And actually that multiplies and that extends and that grows, and hopefully that rubs off on us all and we're better people because of it. Our doing should never become our identity, but it is a key to unlocking it as well. It's not, we shouldn't be wrapped up so much in what we do that becomes our identity. So like, I'm Lewis and I'm a digital marketer and that's how I talk about it all the time. That's not my identity, but actually that unlocks something with me. I'm not just Lewis the pastor. There's a lot more to it than that. I'm not just the person who stands up here on a Sunday. There's a lot more to me than that. That's not my whole identity, but it unlocks something within us. And if today you're sat there thinking, well, I'm struggling a little bit to get around the concept of serving. I don't know whether it's something that I can do, how that works for me, how I would even have the time, the energy. Well, I want to talk today about your fuel when it comes to serving. What is the fuel of your serving or your lack of serving? What is it that is within you or not within you that is actually not fueling you in the way that you should? Now, I'm not just saying this so that everybody comes to me afterwards and says, I would love to serve next week. That's not what this is all about. If you want to serve, that's great. Come and join the team. But there's not a pressure to come and do that. It's actually as we form this relationship with God, as he speaks to us, that we're like, that's what God's calling me to do in this season. But what I'm sharing today extends beyond serving on a Sunday morning. This is our whole lives. This is what we do in our workplace. This is what we're like in our homes. And so when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about serving. Don't just narrow it down to thinking, well, this is how I should behave if I serve on a Sunday. This is actually more about who we are and what we do aside from that. So who wants to know the different types of serving? Yes, we've got some hands. Let's go. The more you encourage me, the better I'll preach. So go for it. So here's the different types of serving. The first one is others or obligation fueled. Now, I'm sure that we've all been at this point at some point in our lives. Maybe it's a time where you could maybe even feel this at work, where you feel like you're obliged to your boss. And yes, if your boss asks you to do something, you have kind of got to do it. I understand that. But there's also sometimes we put this pressure on ourselves that I need to do it for that person. It might be that you come to church and you've heard this message and you go, I've got to do it because Lewis talked about serving. No, I want to say from the outset, if you've ever, please do not feel any pressure from me or Liliana or anyone else to serve. If it's in your heart, please come and serve. But actually, we should never do it under an obligation or feel like we have to because someone has said, because actually, you'll never feel satisfied. If that's your fuel for serving, you'll never feel satisfied because you'll never feel like it's good enough. You'll always feel like, I've got to do more. I've got to do something else for someone else. I've got to be there earlier because actually that person needs me there earlier. Actually, it shouldn't be about what others think or an obligation. The second is to be self-fueled. Now, initially, this is better than being obligation-fueled, because there's something about self who's like, I'm thinking about this a bit more, I'm doing this because I want to do it. But the problem with being self-fueled is, you don't have to put your hands up for this, but by human nature, we're all a little bit selfish at heart, aren't we? And when it doesn't suit us anymore, I think, actually, I'm gonna bow out now, because actually that doesn't suit my life right now. That doesn't suit where I'm at right now. Actually, giving of myself in whatever capacity it is, that doesn't suit me in this moment. But actually, what happens when you do that is that you end up feeling like you're missing out, because actually you kind of want to be involved, but there's something about seeing other people starting to step into those places. Maybe you stepped out of a role and someone stepped in, and actually you're then like, I used to do that, but I don't do it anymore. And there's something about feeling like I'm not a part of things in the same way anymore. And so self, although it can feel like a good thing initially, actually it turns out to be something of a disappointment. But the third one, the final one, you'll be pleased to know this is a good one. So this is the one we all want to be, okay? And that is spirit-fueled. Because when you're spirit-fueled, actually everything doesn't seem like a chore. It doesn't, actually you feel satisfied. Because your satisfaction isn't in what other people think, it's what God thinks. And if God's asked me to do something, and I've done it, God's pleased. I don't need to try and please man. And actually then feel included, because God's going to lead you to be a part of things in the right space and the right time. And so you're not going to have that feeling of like, I wish I was involved. I used to do that, but now I'm not a part of it. And if that is your story, and if you're like, I've stepped out of things, whatever that looks like, it's like, take some time and pray to God. It's like, God, do you want me to step back in? Don't just step back in because I've said it today. Take some time, pray, and say, God, what is it you're asking me to do? What is my next step? Is it to step back into maybe where I was before? But as I say, this is wider than just serving on a Sunday. And actually, I want to read this from Colossians. Colossians 3, verse 23 to 24. It says this: whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord. Not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. And there's something that shifts in our mentality. I remember when me and Liliana first got together and she shared this verse in the context of work. I'd never thought about it before in that way. And I was like, yeah, when I'm working, when I'm in my job, actually I should be doing it as unto the Lord. I should be giving it of myself as much as I would in any other scenario. Otherwise, it's like, am I being true to who I am? Is that really who I am if I'm only doing it in one place, but not the other? And I wanted to just throw up on the screen a few examples of people who are serving as unto the Lord. I've spoken about this building and the work that we've been doing. And I don't know how well you can see it, but probably not as well as I'd quite hoped. But we've got people, I'm going to get up on this stage here. We've got Adam here doing the sink, sat down there, leaky water. We've got Margot up here doing windows. Here we've got Savas, Matt, Eden and Polly. If you're sat on the white chair, they scrub those. They're down on their knees scrubbing those chairs for you. This is Febe. She's got a mop. She mopped out this whole floor. This is Eden and Mitch. I couldn't, even I'm this close and I couldn't see who it was. So Eden and Mitch, they were down here cleaning and tidying up last week. And Eden keeps popping up, doesn't she? This is Eden, down on her hands and knees, scrubbing the floor because we wanted our kids to have a safe and clean space to be in. And she spent Wednesday night cleaning the floor. And the thing I know about all of those people is it wasn't just because it was church. It wasn't just because we were getting the building ready. That's who they are. That's the people that they are. That's the characters that they are. And actually, it's something about, I'm going to do it as unto the Lord. I didn't do it because I said we need to clean the building. I just said the building's open. They're like, what can I do? How can I make this happen? And that's the kind of attitude that we should all have in all ways. It's like, how can I serve people? How can I be a blessing to people? When we realize what we've got, what we've gained in our relationship with Jesus, it's like, I just want to give back for the love that I've received. So, God was speaking, I've gone far from my notes, but we're going to get back to it now. I want to talk about a Bible story from the New Testament. And we kind of touched on this story a little bit last week. It's interesting, I think, as we go through this series, there's a few verses that are going to overlap from week to week. But we're going to pick up a story in Mark 6. and we're going to read it together. So if you want to follow along, it's going to come on the screen. But it's Mark 6, verse 30 onwards. And it says this: "The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they did and all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going, they did not even have a chance to eat. He said to them, 'Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest.' So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place." You're probably thinking, what's this got to do with serving? We're getting there. But actually, what's really interesting is, like, have you ever felt like that? Have you ever felt tired? Have you ever felt like, you're turning up on a Sunday morning, I'm tired, I could maybe do without being here this morning. You know, yesterday my parents flew back home and my sister arrived and my dad booked the flights and he said, "Don't worry, your sister's going to come in on the flight that we're leaving on." And when he sent through all the confirmation, they left from Paphos and my sister arrived into Larnaca. Last night I drove to Paphos, dropped my parents off. My sister's flight was delayed, so I came home, had an hour at home, went and picked up my sister, came back home. Reggie was still awake, needed feeding. Then he slept through the night. He woke up early this morning and needed feeding. And honestly, my flesh was quite tired this morning. I woke up and I was like, I could quite happily stay in bed for another few hours. I know how these disciples felt. You know, it's like, Jesus, we're tired. It's time for a rest. Please give us a rest. And actually, what does Jesus say? Let's go. Let's have a rest. You know, at this point, actually, what had happened previously is the disciples, a lot had been happening. And actually, recently, John the Baptist had been beheaded and killed. And so there was a lot going on from not only had they been serving emotionally, it was a difficult time for them. And Jesus says, let's go and have some rest. But then we pick up in verse 33, "But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a great crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things." I'm going to be honest, if I was one of the disciples right now and Jesus said, "Let's go, let's have a rest, let's have some food," and we arrive there and there's people and Jesus starts teaching, I'm like, oh, come on. Like, this is supposed to be the time for a rest. But actually Jesus is saying, the people need me right now. They need this teaching. They've come, they're hungry. I need to share with them. And so that's what he does. Jesus shares with them. He had compassion on them because they were lost, a sheep without a shepherd. And so he goes on to say, he says, "By this time it was late in the day. So his disciples came to him. 'This is a remote place,' they said, 'and it is already very late. Send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat.' But he answered, 'You give them something to eat.' They said to him, 'That would take more than half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat?'" This is the feeding of the 5,000 that's about to happen in just a moment. And so you can imagine the disciples looking at all those people saying, like, Jesus is like, "Will you feed them?" It's like, how is it possible for us to feed them? You know, like, logistically, right now, if I said to all of us here, let's feed 5,000 people now, I mean, it would be an absolute nightmare. It would be difficult even with all of the supplies that we could gather right now. But Jesus is saying, go on, you feed them. And actually, there was something that God was trying to do in them there, because the disciples had been around him for a long time. They'd been receiving his teaching. They'd been growing. They'd been fed themselves. And he was actually like, what are you learning? What are you able to give out of yourselves in this moment? And actually, what happens is the times when we are unable, that's when God steps in, because God is able. And actually, no, they couldn't feed that many people. It was impossible for them to do it in that way. But God comes and steps in. But actually, there was something about taking them from being people who were needy to actually people who were going to be able to feed others. And actually, God wants to take us. He doesn't want us to be needers. He wants us to be feeders. There's actually something as we first come to him, yes, we need to learn. We need to absorb and we need to be taught by him. And that's a continual thing. You know, if you live to 105, you'll be 105 and God will still be teaching you new things. But actually, he wants us to be feeding people as well. He wants us to take what we've learned, take what he's speaking to us, and give it out to other people. One of the best ways we can do that, we spoke about that last week, is to get into our word, get into our Bible. Actually, as we get into there, that's when God speaks to us. I know the amount of times where I pick up my Bible and I start reading, and maybe it's verses I've read 100 times before, but actually something new springs out to me, and God's like, that's for that person. Actually, you can speak into that situation from this verse. So I want to encourage you, get in your Bibles, allow God to speak into your lives. When we look at this moment of the feeding of the 5,000, he says, go and feed them. They could have looked at that like a task, couldn't they? Like, Jesus has given us a task, we've got to feed them. But actually it was more than a task. This was a lesson for the disciples. He wanted to teach them something in this moment. And so we're going to jump into verse 41 where this is Jesus. He says, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fishes and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. And then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the fish among them. I love this bit. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. What an amazing moment that must have been. You know, looking at all those people, how are we going to feed them? The miracle happens and it's like we're each collecting a whole basket of leftover food. And I would, if I had a chance to go back in history and see different things, it's one of the moments I would love to actually know how that happened. You know, did Jesus just keep breaking the bread and it just kept reappearing? How did that happen? But there's this moment where actually at the end they have these 12 baskets left over. And for the crowd, they got fed. It fed the people physically, but the disciples were fed spiritually in that moment. And actually, they were the ones serving. And who were the ones who got to see the baskets left over? It was the disciples. They got to witness the miracle firsthand. You know, the people, they were part of the miracle. They got to receive the food, and that in itself is a miracle. But actually, I wonder how many of them knew what had really happened. You know, if you're like 300 people deep in a crowd, maybe you get some whispers like, I think there was just like some bread and fish and it's heading this way. I don't know what's going on. But actually, no, the disciples, they got to see it. They got the 5 loaves, the 2 fish, and they got to know exactly the miracle that happened. And when you serve, when you're a part of things, when you're doing what God's called you to do, you get to be a part of those little miracles. Luke was saying earlier about stepping in, and you don't know who's on the end of your yes. You know, when you say yes to Jesus, when he calls you to go and do something, like when God called us to move to Cyprus, I didn't know. The only person in this room I knew was Polly, actually. That's the only person who I knew moving here. Everyone else I didn't know, and actually I've got to know you. And there was something about God wanted me to be here to meet with you. I'm not saying, look, Jesus is the answer. I'm not the answer to your problems, but God was calling me here for a reason. And actually God calls each one of us for a reason. There's people on the end of our yes that we don't know, and actually we may never fully even know. We may never fully understand, but it's just about that, having that heart of saying, yes, Jesus, I'll go and I'll do what you're asking me to do. Okay, so as I begin to, I guess, round things off and bring things into a close, I actually want to bring to us some verses from 2 Corinthians. And actually it's talking about a moment where Paul writes to the Corinthians, and there's a church in Jerusalem that's extremely poor, and he's given them an opportunity to give financially. And so these verses are talking into that, but actually these verses speak more than just finances. There's a theme in here that if we grasp is much wider than how much we're giving and all of that kind of thing. It's about how are we giving of ourselves. Okay, so it's in 2 Corinthians, and we're going to read from chapter 9, and we're going to read verses 6 through to 10. And he says this, remember this, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. Whoever sows generously will also reap generously. Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. You know, when it comes to serving, don't do it under compulsion. Don't do it because you feel that you have to. What I was saying earlier, it's not about the self-fuel. Actually, it's about because God has asked me to do it. This is how much I can serve. This is how much I can give of myself in whatever area it might be, because this is what I have decided in my heart with God. And he goes on to say this, and God is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, there's a lot of alls there, you will abound in every good work. As it is written, they have freely scattered their gifts to the poor, their righteousness endures forever. Now he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will also supply and increase your store of seed and will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. A couple of thoughts in these verses. And just jumping back to verse 8, it says this, and God is able. I said earlier, there's that moment where actually we aren't able. It's not about us and what we can do, actually. It's about saying yes to God and allowing him to step in, because God is able. Where it's too much for us, where we're not able to do things, it's never too much for God. God is always able. So that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. When we're doing it for the right reasons, when we're doing it for God because he's called us, we'll have everything we need to abound in every good work. He is able, but are you available? God will step in. He is able, but actually, are you available? Are you allowing time in your week for him to speak in, so that actually if he asks you to do something, you would even hear him? Or maybe your week's so jam-packed full that there's no time for God to even actually say anything to you because you're so focused on other things. There's something about, as I said earlier, the human beings of actually sitting and resting. It says many times in God, be still and know that I am God. Take time in his presence. Be available for what he is calling you to do. But in verse 6 to 7, it says this: remember, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows generously will also reap generously. And this final bit here: every one of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. There's something about being cheerful and when God asks us to do something, not saying like, yes, fine, God, I'll do that. There's something about actually our hearts being open and being like, yeah, God, thank you for that opportunity. I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. I may not get it perfectly, but I'm going to do it to the best of my ability. There's something about being a cheerful giver of ourselves. So if you're serving in any way, ask yourself this question: are you serving joyfully? Does it look like you're happy to be doing what you're doing? Or do people look at you and think, I'm not really sure they want to be doing what they're doing right now? Are we giving off that impression they're actually like, well, I've got to do this, I've got to get it done. It's actually, maybe it's better for us to take a season out, take time out, and actually come back when we feel that God is saying, be involved, do this thing, and be able to do it joyfully. But as we come back to a close, I want to circle right back round to what I was saying before about, it's all about the fuel that we're doing this in. If you're doing it because you feel compelled to do it by someone, that's going to run out. It's never going to satisfy. If you're doing it because of self, there's going to come moments where it's not going to be enough. I don't know if you've ever put the wrong fuel in a car, if you drive a car, if you ever put diesel in a petrol or petrol in a diesel, all the husbands and wives are looking at each other and she's like, no, it's not. I've never done that. But if you put petrol in a diesel, that's really bad very quickly. But if you put diesel in a petrol, actually what happens is the car will sort of run. It will kind of go, but just not very well. And then eventually it will come to a halt. And I think for us, if we've got the wrong fuel in when it comes to serving, there's actually something that happens within us, like putting the diesel in the petrol. It's like, we can kind of do it. The engine's kind of going, we're kind of limping along, but there comes a point where we crash. It can't last for too long because actually we come to the end of that moment and actually it all falls apart. And so there's something about today taking stock of where you're at and saying, God, when I do these things, am I using the right fuel? Am I coming from the right place? And so I want to finish with these final two verses that says this: remember this, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows generously will also reap generously. When you read those things, you think, I want to reap generously, but that means I've got to sow generously. That means I've got to put more in. I was speaking earlier about I do digital marketing, and one of the things I have to do is, if I've got budget to spend for a client, I look at the ads and I look on the return on investment. If one is doing well, I will put more money into that one because it's making more money back. And that's how we should be with God. It's like, I'm just going to put more in, because the more I put in, the more I'm going to get back from you. We're not doing it because we get the reward, but actually that's a byproduct of it. When we truly love Jesus, when he's our everything, when he's calling us to do things, actually there's something about the more I give, and you can't outgive God. I dare you to try. we've done it at times where we've given generously, and God has given back generously even more. And I'm like, this doesn't make sense. But you can't outgive God. And he actually is one of the rare things that he says, test me in this. And just give of yourself, whether it's financially, give of yourself, give of your time. And actually, you ask a lot of our guys who are serving today, maybe they came in tired. I'll speak for myself. I came in tired this morning. I know this afternoon, if I hadn't have come here this morning, the whole morning would have been very different if there was no one speaking. But I would have been actually disappointed. I'd been like, I feel like I've missed out. But actually, I'll go home from here and I'll feel energized because I came to do what God had called me to do. And it's the same for all of us, whatever that looks like, whatever it is. Actually, there's something of an energy that comes back as we give out of ourselves.